Steve. How'd you get it to be into this crazy world of intelligence?
Man, I tell you, it's all about kind of patterns or pathways that you didn't know you were going to take to get you to where you are. And I'm sure there's a lot of stories that way. Mine started as a first growing up in small town Riverview, Florida.
That's just outside Tampa, right?
Yeah, just south of Tampa, and actually inside the confines of what is described as Tampa, but a town within. And so, small town life there. Not a lot of money in my family. Going through the struggles that is that with a single mom. My mom and dad were separated, and then having a rough start there out of high school, but then clinging towards the Marine Corps. Joining the military, not knowing why. Then just around boot camp time, 9/11 happening, getting to my first duty station, 21 years old, shipping off on a ship into the initial invasion into Iraq, fresh, 21st birthday, 2 days before getting on a ship to travel around the world.
What year was that?
Yeah, so that was around 2003.
Okay.
Yeah. Floated over
when it was hot and heavy over there.
Yeah, it was the beginning. It was kind of, there was a lot of obvious upfront work that is probably prior to the invasion. And we floated, from North Carolina in my case, all the way to into Kuwait, right around Kuwait. Stayed there for a while, debarked the ship, and stayed in Kuwait and waited for a couple months. Did some training, some drills with NBC, but. From there, once we got to go, we pushed into Kuwait and then up through and into Iraq.
Were you an intel person in the Marines or?
No. I was so initially in the Marine Corps. I was on the ground in the infantry. So it was in this case we were traveling from from Kuwait up into Iraq, part of 3rd Battalion, 2nd Marines, in RCT2, and traveled up into. We didn't even know kind of how everything was progressing because we didn't have a lot of comms. The comms wasn't as in a conventional unit, not as robust as what it is today. And so I didn't talk to then my wife for about 4 or 5 months. We were just disconnected. It was all letters, and at that time moving so fast. So anyways, I remember sitting off the coast or sitting off of the just outside of a city in a long halt, and the battalion commander got us together in like the best speeches I've ever heard. As he pulled everyone together, again, trying to think about where we are in time, 21 years old, and my best friends at that time, not knowing, just green, and being told that there are enemy POW, or there are POWs that are American POWs captured, that there are women and children that are being affected, and that they have contractors hanging from bridges in the city, and there's a Marine partner unit that was pinned down, and that was 1-2, and they've taken heavy casualties, and so then that was in the city of Nasiriyah, and what he said that really gives me chills every time I say it is that everything that moves when we pull into this city, you will kill it. And then we got as much ammo as we could carry and whatever we wanted, and we kicked out the windshields of our soft-skin vehicles at the time before up armor. And then we drove into the city as we started hearing the gunshots as we pulled closer to the bridges of Nasiriyah. When we got there, 3-2 and 1-2 were there. And the first time, 1-2 had taken some heavy casualties, almost a whole half of a company, Charlie Company 1-2. If you read about that story, it's a really story of heroism and sacrifice, and for in that case an army unit that had taken a wrong turn that turned into some POWs. And so as we drove past that, initially prior to getting to that gunfire, it was just leading up to what would be next couple of months of some intense kind of door-to-door stuff, and I think that all culminated with the rescue operation, and as we went door to door to find Jessica Lynch in a hospital, and then the story of the rescue operation. I mean, I was laying in a defensive position, pointing outward with water up to my waist, and a gun that probably wouldn't wouldn't shoot very well over time.
Right.
So anyways, from there, that guy in the hole in the ground is really the beginning of it for me. And then
So before you went into Nasiriyah, and your commander is telling you, we're going to shoot anything that moves, what's going through your head as a 21-year-old Marine?
You know, it was green. You didn't have anything. You didn't have any expectations. You're kind of just, you got the training. It's you've been geared up for this. You know what you were going to. You had a couple months of waiting, had a couple months of training and briefing on the boat, and so you just don't know what to expect, but also know what to expect, because the Marine Corps does a very good job of talking about how history paces where you're going, and so gives you a perspective. And so if you choose to, and so as we step into that, after that really motivational briefing, the very next day prior to us pushing in, we got a real perspective really quickly, and that was as we were laying in the defense of our long security hole, just waiting, not knowing what was going on. We had a vehicle pull up onto our defensive position, and I watched a Toyota pickup truck get shot by a javelin, so a missile, anti-tank missile shoots a pickup truck. And funny thing is when the truck landed, the people that were driving the vehicle took off and ran across the front of our defense, so they lived through it. And I was like, that was amazing, right? So then we also there was a big air campaign on the city that was obviously all these things happening at one time. So you watch from afar, a really good light show, lights, cotton candy sky at nighttime. And so then, moving past Nasiriyah, come home for a couple months, just enough time to say hi, and then turn into a combat replacement for Tutu to go right back out. And so that was a different experience. You go home proud of what happened in Nasiriyah, being a part of that, just being a part of that whole mission. And then
what was the result of being in Nasiriyah, of your unit being in Nasiriyah? You mentioned Jessica Lynch. Can you maybe elaborate on that a bit? Like what was the deal there?
Yeah, so I'm sure there's a greater strategic me, 21 years old, young guy. Right. I was just a part of the cog in the wheel, so not strategic enough to understand kind of the full details. But looking back, it depends on how perspective in that case. From my perspective, it was we have a couple of American units, Marines, that are pinned down and are taking heavy casualties, and so the end result was getting them off the X. Getting them into a better position, and then a lot of things happening at very quickly. Information wise, traveling, not nowhere near the speed of today, but as an example, the fall of Baghdad, very quick during that around that same time. Obviously there was a lot of things going on in Iraq, and so Army pushing up and into Baghdad, and actually the city of Baghdad being a priority and falling, that all happened. As on a strategic level, it was really just that maintenance battalion taking a wrong turn down the wrong road up the gut of Nasiriyah was just not planned. It was not a route, and they didn't also know that city had as much military members in it as what it did. And so the secondary effect and kind of result was, looking for those POWs, looking for those American POWs and where they were and what was left. And so, obviously culminating into a rescue operation was really solid. Yeah.
Okay. So you leave, come back to the United States. How did you travel back?
Yeah. So, sorry, it's long, 25 years, 20 years. So as we think about it,
you got this.
Yeah. So, I took I think I recall, I took a trip. I flew back on that one. So I came back, and the rest of my unit, they took the ship back. But gotcha. I flew back. Yeah.
Okay. So almost just like that, you're back.
Yeah.
Like instantly.
Yeah.
I mean,
back.
Interesting.
Yeah.
You're there. Crazy stuff we're talking about. Rescuing POWs and firefights and cotton candy skies, and then before you know it, you're back in the United States, and you're you're back to reality, right? You're driving past, typical American hometown and back and seeing your family and stuff. What was that like?
Yeah, it's interesting because one of the stories, one of the things I remember vividly is that so we didn't take a shower. We were moving so fast in that movement from Kuwait into Iraq. I went 91 days without a shower. So I wore everybody was moving. We didn't have resupplies, so we had those same socks. So I wore the socks until I threw them away. So 4 weeks, and we were in MOP level 0. So we had the MOP suit on top of our uniforms, and so it's not only, and then
that's the MOP suit is the suit that's made for chemical warfare, right?
Exactly, yeah. And then on top of that, you had your flak jacket and your Kevlar and all your gear that you're carrying, and also the weather, in Iraq in the desert.
So would it be safe to say that those socks did not smell alluring?
Oh wow, no. And then you can't, you try to take your shoes off to let your feet air out, so then you'd mitigate any kind of foot injuries. And so, but then again, you're in combat, so you can't take your boots off because you don't have time to put them back on. So you'd often just kind of just live in them until you're going to throw them away. But so when I got back, the reason I say that is, when I got back, I took a bath, even though from the time we flew home until the time I got home, there was a couple showers in there. I got home and got to my own bathtub and laid in it. And I remember sitting there for a couple hours. When I got out of it, there was a ring around the tub.
Oh,
yeah. So that was interesting.
It must have been a nice feeling.
This is welcome home from my wife too. She was. It was interesting for her to see what that was, experience that. But to your point of Mike, I never really actually considered the pressure of going straight from that environment to another environment with that little amount of decompression.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and so, but again, it went right back into the rest of the fight was still on, and so it was back down to Camp Lejeune and right back into training loops, and then we spun back out and went for a second time, probably about 6 months later. We're talking about the end of 2004, I think. So there's a little bit of time in there, maybe 6-8 months, and then over into straight into Camp Fallujah, and stayed there for a while in the beginning of a part of Phantom Fury, beginning of that with 2-2. And a different mission, but again, when we talk about pride in what you had before, and then think now that you're experienced, and it's a whole new experience, right? So it's a brand new experience that you don't even know you're about to walk into. And so there was, it was just an interesting difference, but also its own set of valuable lessons. But moving past that, and actually, this is the first time I haven't attended any of those events. There's a lot of opportunities for you to get together with those battles that are really times in history, and those people that are getting together. The 25-year, I think, 2003 was Nasiriyah, 2004 for Fallujah, and every year, 5 years, 10 years, there's these anniversary parties and events. I've never went to one. Mainly because while I remember these things, I have my own version of them that I like to. That's the way I cope with the situation, and you don't necessarily want to open that box up all the time. So, yeah, but it's all about how it's still going back to why. It's what builds you as a person if you allow it to, and the perspective of all of those things is what becomes important. And so as we think about that as the guy in the hole, and you move into a lateral move to a new job in Intel, what I think made me a really good Intel analyst was that perspective of what the person that I never knew needed. And the time, I didn't even know, as an example, there was anything, there wasn't a drone. We were getting a brief as we were walking, before we walked into a mission, patrol, and it was by one of our resident Intel guys that didn't have what is, today, the ability to look at an environment before you're there. And so in Intel, then you learn how to better prepare those people, or yourself better prepare your previous self. And I think that's really powerful, and that's what I've tried to drive into, like, all of the things that I'm doing. And even before the Marine Corps, there should be the story that I used to tell about my drive and my ambition, doing construction and having that lifestyle understanding. And I used to call it the guy on the guy on the ladder, or I think it was what is it?
The guy in the hard hat.
Yeah,
maybe?
it was. Yeah, I just lost the train of thought, but it was.
It's all good. I
Yeah.
think what you're trying to say, and correct me if I'm wrong, is that these roles, the nitty-gritty roles of actually being in the foxhole, actually being up on the ladder, actually getting your hands dirty, gives you a much better perspective as an intelligence professional.
Yeah.
Because you know at the end of the day, one, what you're doing is important, and two, you know, how the person on the ground benefits from the work that you're doing.
Lives and
right?
dies.
Exactly.
Yes.
Is that about right?
Yeah, and the guy in the scaffolding is really what the beginning, right? So I forgot about that, but ultimately that's what drives me. It's like, do you want to be? If I stay working this construction job, the best I can be is that guy, and he's like a Florida raisin, worked his whole life on the scaffold, and so that's what drove me into, you know, the Marine Corps. And then again, like, taking it back to exactly where you're at, understanding that they're getting them information, the guy in the hole is they're going to live and die by the information, is really what drives you to want to do better, to stay in the fight, to work extra, to make sure that, you know, you're staying late and coming in early, and making sure that you're checking every single piece of information over and over. And so I've tried to use that as the premise of my ambition in a lot of ways, thinking backwards to what I wish I had. And then I took that same thought over into, after, you know, medical retirement from the Marine Corps, into my business jobs. So working in a couple different environments, special operations environments, and being able to then understand now, from being a Marine Corps intel analyst and GeoInt analyst, and then having the toys and the cool toys, and understanding, like, okay, this is a whole nother environment that now opens up the aperture for you, but then gives you a whole new environment to bonus off of, to again get after that person that previously was you, all the way back to the guy in the hole, getting that information to them so they can make the right decision, so they can accomplish whatever mission that they're after.
So I really want to get into what you're doing with commercial analytics, open source intelligence, that sort of thing. But maybe you could touch on, just for a bit, you know, the work that you did with supporting SOCOM as an intelligence person. Obviously, you don't need to get into sources and methods and that sort of thing, but maybe just about the environment and, you know, your mindset at the time. Obviously, there was a lot happening in the, you know, early 2010, 11, 12 time period with ISIS and all that good stuff. Were you around in that time period?
Yeah. It's just a graduation point in the story. There is moving out of the Marine Corps. That's about the time when I got out of the Marine Corps and into supporting SOCOM, as you said there. As a, you know, transitioning out of the military and into as a full motion video analyst, working on and supporting different areas of the world, and kind of a global perspective in that case, right? So, again, being a part of something bigger, and then now also have an understanding of what tools are out there and methods, which oftentimes keeps the conversation pulled into places we can't talk about. But you know, having that global reach and previous kind of experience helped me to excel very quickly in business. And so, you know, you have a lot of other coworkers in that environment that are young and come into the environment, but don't necessarily have the experience, especially at, you know, small unit leadership level, where
Right.
there's no more purest form of leadership than telling someone where to go, that their life might be in danger, and then still go based off of what you're asking them to do. And so taking that and then kind of in a different way as a analyst, and then team leader, and then, you know, managing programs that do that has really kind of helped me not only in the leadership side, but also, again, thinking back to how the information that we're going to provide eventually gets to someone that can make a really, really informed decision. And it's all about the analytics. So,
So yeah, I want to get into that. I want to get into the analytics and talk about everything that you're doing right now. Obviously, over the last, I don't know, 10, 15 years, we've just seen this explosion in commercial data, right? New sensors being launched into space, new sensors, we hold in our pockets. I forget who said this, but every human is a sensor, right? All we've done is collect massive amounts of data, right? And of course, the challenge with inside the intelligence community is, what do we do with it? How do we learn from that and actually tell an intelligence story that is actionable for XYZ circumstance? So maybe you can kind of like preview like what are you doing with the commercial data, and how is it different from open source data and intelligence?
Yeah. So by definition, if you were to kind of, it's important to delineate kind of the differences between intelligence and then information, but both may inform different parts, but how it's received, how it's collected, the sources and methods, as I talked about before, is what really kind of defines the differences. Although they may at some point come back together downstream. So starting with the typical intelligence disciplines that are bound by those sources and methods. Let's say just pulling out OSINT as an example. Defined by the intelligence discipline, open source intelligence, defined as a category of intelligence, and then comparing that against what is publicly available information and commercially available information. One of these are bound by policy, and others on the commercial side, the analytics are not bound by policy as long as the authorities to which the people that are receiving the information are there. But they can often come to the same or oftentimes more resolved, more refined in the commercial space. So what we found is that, over the past couple of years, as you said, coming out of, the just kind of uptick of the information coming in, the amount of information, and I would kind of go further and say that it's everything is a sensor. Everything either in plain sight or really if you choose to see it, if you have the right eyes to be able to see what's important. And it's not about what's actually important today. It's about understanding and capturing that information because it may become important later. Information that then is the key into unlocking the answer to a question. So
what would you say is the main difference between open source data and commercial data? What's the difference between those two?
Open source would be any information that you can find in the open internet, right? And commercial data would not be considered something that I'm scraping. It's about companies that have their own sources and their own ways to collect that information that then can be available for purchase, and we buy that. It's almost like I would consider the open source environment as the haystack. And I would say that the individual companies that have data sets would be the needles. And then you have to further refine those needles to get to the right synthesis or the information that then tells a story that you're looking to answer.
So we did a previous podcast with some OSINT experts. We've had a few on OSINT specifically. And they go into the different ways that you can use open source intelligence to track human traffickers and capture criminals and that sort of thing, run these really in-depth investigations. If you add in that commercial data layer, right, the commercial data, the needles that you spoke about in the haystack, what are the capabilities?
Yeah, so again, coming and drawing from that experience, and we'll call the traditional full motion video analysis that we've done with traditional means and previously. And again, it's about the sources and methods that become a difficult conversation to have. But when you think about those as being confined to a certain environment or having limitations based off of where something can fly or how much it can carry or how much as far as payloads and sensors and things like that. That's powerful in itself, and it has a time and place, and it never should be replaced. That it's always going to be there. When you think about a commercial data platform and you consider the architecture as the same as the platform itself, the carrier of the information, and then you think about the individual data sets that are the payloads, there's an unlimited amount of payloads only defined by how much you have to spend, and also by how good the decisions are on how you spend that capital. So I like to call it a wider find. So there is a wider view, and some of it, albeit buffered out into a periphery. So you just have the understanding of why, further out from the epicenter understanding of it, and then a deeper kind of fix or fine point on getting to the answer that you're looking for. So it doesn't have limitations as much. So those are both powerful in themselves. But we have to what we have to do is try to bring those together, and that would be for the DoD, kind of just for the country and how we can better the production that we have, and get to the more rich answers. But as you look out, just the same. I mean, in the GeoInt world, I mean, there's so many questions. Almost every question or every problem can be answered or better, more refined decision making by data. And so it's about understanding what the problem set is, and be able to apply the right data and tool set package to it, or recipe as I call it, to answer that question. And so
what you're saying is we can essentially replace billions of dollars of investment into aerial ISR assets with a much smaller investment, or maybe the same, I don't know, into just purchasing the data itself from commercial vendors. So instead of flying an asset overhead, what you're saying is, and correct me if I'm wrong, we can purchase a bundle of commercial data from different vendors. And the data we get from those vendors, depending on the recipe, what you call it, right? A data recipe, you can determine the same level of intelligence from that data as you can from that $1 billion ISR platform. Or is it different things that you can determine from the commercial data? And what you really need to do is marry the two. Like, is that about right?
Yeah. No, I would go back to the fact that they're both equal. They both have power in their own right. But them being together is really where it comes together. And so I would say it's not one or the other, both and. And so if you were to consider how much one aircraft might cost, and the maintainers and the risk and all of it that takes to put that aircraft over a place, and then you scale that across how many of those that we're actually spending the money and time on, and the risk, and then you consider how you might be able to more efficiently use those assets. And
those are only in places where we can actually operate.
Exactly.
I mean, we can't go to China and
That's right.
fly a UAS. They're not going to let us do that.
Sure.
So that makes a lot of sense. So from a commercial data perspective, what can you give me an idea of what types of intelligence you can derive from commercial data?
Yeah, I mean, I can give you a quick vignette, right? So around the time of the invasion into Ukraine from Russia, we started looking at at ships that were moving around, and we had a list of about 100 that we had a customer ask us for, and we looked at where the historic ports for the ships where those ships have ported at.
So you were looking at AIS data?
Yeah. So ships transponders pushing out.
But AIS is open source, is it not?
Yeah, it can. Again, this is where things matter, right? So there's you can get it in the open source. You can definitely get some information and attributes in the open source, but you don't have the vendors that coalesce the information and pull it together, and you have deeper attributes.
Okay.
You're paying for that kind of refined information, right? And so if you make the right decisions, if you take the time to do the research and development into those data sets and understand what those attributes look like, in this case we did, you can see not only where the ship is flagging And then you can layer that with other pieces of information. That's really where it becomes valuable. And historics and understanding the people are the kind of still a bit of the center because of that tradecraft and understanding. And so, as we looked at the historic ports of interest that were that allowed us to bring that list down from 100 down into about 7. And then we used commercial data, or commercial space data, like imagery, imagery that we were for purchase. And again, this is not defined. This is the difference. It's not defined by how much we are a priority. It's defined about how much we're willing to pay for the next pass or a new image, And so but aligning those to where the ports of interest that the AIS showed us, and then where those vessels have been parked there, and where they're currently at, allowed you to correlate that information together, and then start to build a picture. And then as you get a good look and understanding of where the ships were of interest, and these are all surrounding, oligarchs that were tied to and a part of kind of circumventing sanctions and that kind of stuff, right? So as we look at where those vessels were parked, start layering things like ad tech, and people are kind of, and again, through their own omission, through downloading apps, your phone has you're flagging out the ad IDs, and so taking that information of the ad IDs that are relevant to the ships and layering that information into the mix gives you a perspective to understand the care and feeding, who is protecting and providing for this vessel while it's at this port. As an example, and then where those ad IDs have previously been historically, go back a couple months, and so you kind of understand this pattern of, taking a problem that's really big, there's 100 ships. Can we look at these down into something that then becomes very small, that could eventually then turn into a couple kind of set aside targeted ad IDs that then can be turned in, taken and paired with another data set that has businesses tied to it through business information databases to show cutouts and show cutout businesses that are a part of the ownership of the vessel, and then that pattern of life, and can then kind of build the full package that then allows our customer to understand the environment a little bit better.
So what you just talked about was, if we use your word data recipe, the recipe you used was you started with a broad collection of AIS data, right? And then you scoped down a little bit further with the commercial satellite imagery, right? And then even further with the ad tech data.
Right.
And then at some point, I guess, cross-referenced it with business, maybe financial transactions, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
And then at the end of the day, you were able to narrow down
5 W's. Who, what, when, where.
Yeah.
And you really tell the story that then, and again, by the way, it's not about where to hit the hammer. That is, it's about where to hit the hammer. That's important. And to really get to that point right there, we had over 300 data vendors that we worked through to look at with technical exchange meetings to understand where are their geographic strengths. Not only that they have AIS, where are their geographic strengths? Where are their, like, where do they have value in different parts of the world, but attributes wise, where are their strengths in that? And so then we can see, as they become part of the recipe. And if we don't have a need for them today, they become cataloged and they become part of the Rolodex. But it's about that time that is spent there in order to understand which lever to pull when you need it. And it's not about a recipe that's one shot, one time. It's something that consistently has to evolve.
Yeah, I can see how that can be very powerful, especially if at the end of the day, that ad tech data seems very valuable because you're getting down to individuals that, seems pretty reliable, whether you know it or not. You are being collected on all the time through your smartphone. Yeah. And because of that, you're able to be targeted by some type of intelligence operation, and I'll add an unclassified intelligence operation. This is what I'm always talking about. Like, I believe the capabilities outside the skiff, the unclassified production of intelligence, I believe, is the future. I believe it's here. I think we can do just as many great things and be transparent about it, as opposed to, this behind the wall skiff. Nobody can see it. The public can't access it. I think it does a couple things. I think it actually, if the intelligence community moves more in this direction, I think it can help build a lot of trust. There's a lot of mistrust of the intelligence community. I mean, if you just look out there, Google JFK CIA, right? You're going to get, all sorts of theories, and some of them, frankly, are pretty good because they won't release all the information, right? So you don't know what's behind the door. But these types of skiff operations, just leave people to question, what are they doing? Like, we can't talk to these people. They can't say what they're doing or what they're looking at. And there's good reason for classification. Don't get me wrong. I had a previous guest, Keith Mosbach, who said, we have a fetishization. I can't say that word. we have a fetishization for classification, right? Like, in the intelligence community, it's like, okay, they said this, it's top secret, like whatever. It doesn't really meet the threshold. But having these kind of commercial data recipes and unclassified intelligence, I think it's the future, and I think it's super powerful. So yeah, could you give any more examples as to things that you can do with these recipes, and what maybe some other ingredients in the cookbook?
Yeah, it's interesting when you talk about the aggregation of data and classification. That's oftentimes a question for us, right? So sure, in the intel side of things, it's about sources, methods, what's going on, as I keep saying. But really, the aggregation applies there. When you talk about the cut line between, and let's just take intel out of it. We're not even talking about intelligence. We're talking about commercial analytics. When you talk about that, considering commercial analytics, it's about. I'll give you an example, right? So. Every company, whether or big companies, let's use a Costco, Walmart example. Whenever there's and I'll use ad tech. When there's a Costco that is overwhelmed and they're starting to see that there's an expansion opportunity, ad tech layered over top of that Costco environment. It doesn't matter who the people are in that case. It just matters the flow of traffic in the volume. Yeah. The volume. And then you consider where that volume goes home to go bed down. And then you watch that as a pattern over time, and they're flagging on their ad tech. And then you watch where those center points are. Then now you can see where it's beneficial in that case, right? So it's happening information wise all over. And so a matter, and sometimes it's not a bad thing, right? But the point is that there are bad actors that are using it. And so for the good of it, we should not be trying to bound ourselves by policy, but we should be looking at where the opportunities are to make sure that we're not going to get paced. If as a country we're paced because we bound ourselves with policy, which is sometimes that's what we're after. That's what I'm after, is trying to figure out how to find that middle ground where there's trust in the information, because that's another thing. Sometimes, and that comes in with fusing multiple things together to point at and understand. But also the policy that would bind you into not using it, right? So again, that's an example of commercially being used, not even intel. Right. We're talking about just information and companies using it. So
you're talking about policy binding the work that you do. How is it doing that? Like, where's it crossing the threshold? As we talk about that data recipe, into the point where it's, crossing some type of boundary of, executive orders or something like that. Like, at what point does it get there? Or is this something that's undefined at this point?
No, it's definitely defined. I mean, as you said, OSINT has been happening for a long time. And again, I kind of delineate the difference between open source intelligence and government function and commercial analytics as a industry business function. And so I would just kind of differentiate the fact that underpinning that is, things like U.S. persons collection and information on U.S. persons. And so whenever you consider the U.S. government being bound and binded by that, unless they have the right authorities to do that, right? That's on them. That's where intel oversight comes in.
Right.
And then when you consider commercial analytics on this side, you think about things like Elon Musk being tracked by a young teenager.
Right.
And in that case, it's not illegal. It's just happening, and there's no way to stop it. But whenever it's an interesting position to be in, whenever you consider Executive Order 12333 and intel oversight. And so when you look at what that looks like, again, it applies whenever commercial analytics are supporting the government, right?
Gotcha.
And so it depends on, and it's about that. It's about that understanding and partnership right there, and that how the authorities are able to be used and when they're not. And so just to be clear, though, commercial analytics, there's not just to put it into perspective, this data is very expensive. So if you figure millions of dollars annually is spent on a data recipe that our team utilizes, millions, probably upwards of 6-8 million. All right.
That you bring up something kind of interesting to me, anyways. Maybe not interesting to you, but recently Mark Zuckerberg released a statement saying he regretted working so much with the U.S. government on, censoring data and really tampering down on information from U.S. citizens. And what you're talking about, I see in a very similar vein. It could be a way for the U.S. government to circumvent policy by acquiring information through commercial means. But the policy you mentioned, does that govern that? Does it prevent that from happening? Like if the government wanted to get information on U.S. citizens, let's just say you talked about that ad tech data. Let's say, some agency wanted to, look at ad tech data for, they're trying to track an individual. Can a government agency do that?
Not by, with, and through us. That's where policy is. Intel oversight is a government requirement. On their side, they have an obligation to manage their intel oversight. In itself, them managing a company's, looking over the shoulder of a company is against intel oversight in itself. But if they're the purchasing authority of something, whether that is data, information, products, then it's about them having the correct authorities. That's what I was talking about, the authorities to be able to receive that information. And that is exactly where the cut line and kind of defends our
That's where the line is drawn
yeah.
between what the U.S. government should be doing and what they shouldn't be doing.
Exactly, yeah, and what they're able to collect on, what they can't. So it's not.
Okay.
So just to go back to that $10 million annually. As a private company or as an organization that's spending money on data, the ROI is not there just to go collect a bunch of Americans' information. In fact, that's nothing that our team is not working in that regard, right? So we're not supporting Costco, but and if there's no ROI, aka it's not someone's girlfriend or something that we're looking at, and it comes down to ethics, where the government has intel oversight on the business side, you have to have ethical. You have to be responsible sources and methods and information that you're pulling on, because again, it's about the ROI. It's capitalism. It's how much of the information is not only choosing the right information, but it's also choosing what to do, to do the right things with the information that you have. And if it doesn't make dollars, then it doesn't make sense.
You're not going to do it anyways. There's no business case for it.
There's no business case for it, right?
So what you and your team are doing, maybe you could talk a bit about the program that you run, is using a recipe of open source and commercial data to solve problems from customers, and they could be customers from all over the place. Does that sound about right?
Yeah, it's part of it, right? So as an organization, we do have what they call contractor-owned, contractor-operated aircraft. And that aircraft flies in support of the government and in different parts. We have a global footprint. I like to call it the franchise there, in AFRICOM and SOUTHCOM and PACOM. But then packaging that with this commercial platform that has the ability to look further into different places and complementary to what those aircraft can be standalone by themselves or complementary to. And so this is where the beginning of the conversation kind of comes together, I think. And so with what is called Elevate ISR, or that platform that is a commercial platform, we're able to answer questions that don't require an aircraft to go overhead, or at least gives the precursor information to understand an environment. You talked about China. There's many places that there's not the ability to reach in and have things overhead.
Right.
But the ability to kind of get a perspective over the environment that gives you the ability to make a decision on priority, or a decision, and priorities are twofold. I mean, if you have a priority in the commercial space, it means it costs more money. If you have a priority, then it costs different capital on the collateral side. So,
you talked briefly about some of the questions that you can answer with this commercial data without flying an asset overhead. What can you give me an example of the types of questions that maybe you get asked, and you don't need to talk about anything specific, but the type of questions that you can answer with high confidence using this solution, this Elevate ISR solution?
Yeah, there's let's say some infrastructure monitoring reporting, right? So some examples of key infrastructure, whether it's key for us or key for a partner for us. You think about a dam as an example, and I know this has come up in the past couple of months, where the infrastructure was built, and then downstream downstream of that dam is a population that would be extremely hindered by a breach in that dam. It's happened, and so being able to monitor that and be able to take commercial data to understand not only today what it looks like, but also in the recent past and over time how much that dam has degraded, gives you the ability then to package. Again, it's about layered information to then pull together population statistics and provide the information out in a commercial way that is not bound by any kind of collateral concerns, classifications, and then provide that out to where it's helping make decisions on whether or not to increase collections in other manners.
Okay, so you're talking about I wouldn't classify that as a traditional intelligence type of mission.
No.
But it's definitely one where you're leveraging that commercial data. I mean, you're so far you've talked about 3 different scenarios. One is tracking oligarchs in Ukraine, right? The Russian oligarchs in Ukraine. You talked about a commercial use case of tracking ad tech data for establishing new retail locations by Costco, and you just talked about a third use case of tracking the information regarding the dam studies. So to me, that sounds like you can kind of do anything.
Wow.
With it.
Yes, a farmer. I mean, I can go into an example of a farmer. If a farmer, and this could be geoint heavy, so it probably resonates really well. If you were able to either put a sensor on a pole and throughout a farm, or fly a sensor over at a regular drum beat with the right payload, you could tell a story of disease. You could tell a story of drought. You could tell a story that then saves that farmer money. Decision level analytics that through water placement or otherwise being able to take a crop out of disease could save that farmer's livelihood, right? And so there's that example. There's plenty of these examples, but as I said, really almost any problem that's out there could be answered, and all the way into as you were getting at the intel side of things. If you were to think about an environment where ad tech becomes relevant, is if there was in this world of influence. I mean, everything's about influence these days, right? If you think about who is influencing who on a global scale, and being able to call that out, some of the information that you can get in the commercial space you cannot get in the collateral space, right? And so it's about the key that then unlocks the ability to take it another step further in a different direction. And without that key, you would be on a different path. Right. And so if you considered influencing, one country influencing another that then otherwise would be buried through, whether that's lithium mines in South America, whether that is, board influence in Panama, or whether that is a ship dragging an anchor and busting a fiber line that cuts out data for a lot of people. The influence of that, and being able to not only just assume it, but also be able to take the information, layer the information, and provide it in what would be considered an evidentiary package level of information with the source information is powerful.
Could we do a little game with this?
Sure.
Just so let's say we have and this is fictional, so this is not this is not a real thing. Let's say we have a country in Africa, okay? We'll call it Bongo or something. We'll call it Bongo just because why not? We all like bongo trucks. Okay, and Bongo has a problem with a rogue terrorist element that's threatening to overthrow the government, the Bongo government, which is pro-America, right? So pro-U.S. government, let's just say for the circumstances here. But they won't allow us to fly assets overhead. Mm-hmm. And we don't really know much about this group that is, planning to overthrow the Bongo government. Where do you start? How do we, using commercial data or open source data, how do you help prevent that from happening by supplying commercial data analytics to, in this case, AFRICOM, I guess, would probably be the customer reaching out. How would you do that?
I mean, if you take the government organization out of the equation and just say that it's just you trying to gee whiz provide information.
Okay.
Right? And so then this is where the policy becomes less binding. In this case, there's not a lot of USPI obviously in that location, anyways. But
sure.
Just to walk through probably what is the initial approach, which would be you try to soak with the right information with the right data sets that you have. Like you might start out with finding the key opportunity zones or the places that are of interest in the environment. Mm-hmm. And then, you start with that as the epicenter, soak with your information. So you might get some imagery products, you might get some ad tech that you might pull over that area. And again, this is where it comes into the bounding box, what I like to call the watch box, which is not novel. It's just a different types of information going inside of that watch box that with business rules can tell a really good story. And so this is where automation comes into play, where, you can put some business rules that say, if this happens and this happens inside of this watch box, alert me once you start building that kind of baseline of information. And then you can move off and you just go about developing that out. But you can dig all the way down into baseball card sizes of information, bite-sized information that can be who and what are in the environment and who then ultimately getting down to who has the ambition and what are they trying to get after. That information then can be provided for people to make decisions on how they might influence. And so, if you considered, who's connected to who and what and why they might be connected, then you can get to the root of what their ambitions are.
Okay. So you start from a broad perspective and identify locations of interest.
Yeah.
Maybe something you've seen from a photo online or something like that. And then you said soak. That's kind of an interesting use of that word. So you kind of soak that area by extracting commercial data, maybe ad tech like you talked about.
Yeah.
And then from there you can identify activity. Maybe you layer in some satellite imagery to see, who's driving what truck or whatever. Am I on the right path here?
Yeah. I mean, what I would say is that before I get murdered, I would say that every analyst's approach to this might be a little bit different, right? And so if you asked my team leaders, you asked the director for Elevate ISR, they have a different approach. And I would say that, but it all starts with this understanding, as we've very specifically hired the right people that have this baseline understanding, whether they have, similarly intel backgrounds. Let's say they have a geospatial intelligence background or GWINT background, where, you might be interested. Like my approach to that is exactly what you talked about. As a geospatial analyst by trade, I would actually, you might get down into the details, but everyone knows that you have to zoom out in order to understand what it is. And that's a geospatial analyst kind of perspective,
Mm-hmm.
where an all source perspective or someone who deals with multiple different disciplines might start out at the epicenter and allow that to leap them into another path that then takes them to another path. And so
Right.
it's a different approach, but so I guess my point is that the approach may vary, ultimately getting to the right information that then is able to be synthesized, and not everyone's going to be able to do that. If someone tomorrow stole our data recipe as an example, doesn't mean that they're going to have the same results. It's about understanding, because they might choose the wrong tools. And if you don't visualize the data, it's like garbage in, garbage out with any database. And so if you don't visualize the data in the right way, then you're not going to be able to synthesize the data. If you don't synthesize data, you're not going to get to the decision level analytics.
So can you talk about your team a bit? Because, I've always believed that, and I know this to be true, that intelligence is really a team sport, and nobody can do it all. There's just too much information. There's too much to sift through. There's too much to analyze. Too many questions that need answered, and having those different perspectives is really important. So maybe you can talk about your team a bit.
Yeah. So this pin here is the ACE. This is the accelerator element. And so as we look
says your pin is an ace of spades. It has some daggers in it, and it has the number 674 on it. So what's that all about?
Yeah, this here is so the team created this pin, and this is what we kind of rally behind. It's the accelerator element, or ACE, and 674 is our business group, so MSG from Keypad, right? So it's, as we rally behind this, really it started out from a team of one. I was the first one, and then allowed to expand. But as we vetted the people, as we bring in, as I vetted the team, we brought in people with, subject matter expertise, meaning 20 years or better, with varying backgrounds. It's all about diversity of thought. And so as I told my story and laid it out, as a GeoIn analyst, I have folks with human backgrounds. I have folks with SIGINT backgrounds, of my 8 collection management backgrounds. And so they were not only in those trades, but also experts in those trades. And so as we look at whether it's buying data or collections, or whether it's how we synthesize GeoInt information, or GeoInt or commercial sensing, it's about the perspective and having that general understanding of what it looks like to make sure that you're getting the results that you're intending. And then further diverse is I'm the Marine on the team, but we have representation from the Army, representation from the Navy, got representation from and then inside of the ranks, enlisted, a CWO5 on the team, got a couple senior chiefs on the team, 06 on the team. And so it's just like multiple perspectives that's all can tell their own story at this table. And so whenever that comes together, I think is magical, because it's that diversity of thought. And so the ACE not only has built something has built Elevate ISR, but before that we stood up a thing called GoCell. And that's really focused on counter-narcotics, global, open source, threat network, disruption, cell. And for this, it's one of our programs. And as we stood this up, it's really about providing and taking commercial data and providing answers that then help in the counter-narcotics arena. So super valuable, but it took the team effort to be successful. And I'll say that as we look at how we vetted them, most of them not only have the experience that I just laid out, but they also have a lot of them, most of them, special operations backgrounds. Not all of them, because that wouldn't be too diverse. There's I got someone on the team that has a data and architecture background. Example, has never been in the military, and his insights are invaluable to be able to understand. He's out of DHS. He came out of DHS as a 15, and so his insights and what that looks like and his experiences are invaluable. So it's that diverse thought as we're looking at building things, whether it's a commercial analytics platform or whether it's how do we build an architecture that allows commercial to wed up with the traditional information on the collateral systems. That's what we're building for our customers.
So how would that work? Let's say you have your traditional ISR platform, right? There's a ISR platform collecting somewhere in the world, and then the video gets shot back with telemetry data and all that stuff somewhere. It could be anywhere, but let's just say the United States for this instance. and there's a team there exploiting that feed. They're going through the PED process, right? Processing, exploitation, and dissemination. Where does the commercial data layer fit into that process of that PED process? Do you start with that? Does the commercial data, how does that get infused? How do you see that working in a team structure as well?
Yeah, interesting. So you talk about kind of a Intel Ops Center, and then wedding that with what would be an information operations, and kind of keep that clean. There's a couple ways to do that. The first one I think is the most advantageous would be, again, going back to the sources and methods. If the information on the coming off of the aircraft, in that case, doesn't start out collateral or secret because of the sources and methods, and you can figure that out initially, then you can use commercial networking. You can use commercial environments to transport data. So PLEO, utilizing the information, getting the information off of the bird into an environment that is able to be unified with the commercial environment is one approach. Another approach might be taking the data that starts out collateral and building products off of that tell a story of what that asset is able to achieve, and then taking the commercial information and then figuring out how to digital twin that up into the same environment where the environment will be synthesized, or the information be synthesized in secret systems. And then I think there's an in-between, right, where you have one platform providing information in collateral, another providing information in commercial, and then them being stitched together, sneaker net, but it doesn't tell as rich of a story. It doesn't give you what I think is the end game, which is efficiency.
Right.
Efficiency near real time. It's about how can one affect the other in a more efficient way in order to put it in a better position to get the information faster or developed deeper. So
the big push right now across the Army, and it may be true for the other branches, but across the Army especially, is sensing in multi-domain operations. So that's the big thing, right? They want to sense in these different layers, what they call the human domain, right? The human layer, your human intelligence, the traditional domains as well, land, air, sea, space, and then the fifth layer they call the cyber layer, which is all the stuff you're talking about, maybe even a bit more. For that, where would you say commercial data fits into those multi-domain operations? Is there commercial data at every layer?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely. So mud to space. It's about understanding.
Well, I know some Navy people that'll be very upset with you, Steve. And as a Marine, I can't believe you would say mud to space when they all will say seabed to space. But that's okay. That's okay. We'll let them be.
Yeah.
upset at you.
Yeah.
Sorry, go on.
Yeah. So it's about understanding where similar information can be retrieved, right? And so yes, from every echelon of that kind of domain or those domain layers, just the same as it takes a person with experience in the intelligence disciplines in order to understand how to synthesize the information. It takes a person to understand what types of information are similar to what types of information. And so if you were to, as an example, in the GEOINT space, if you wanted to understand what an environment looked like, let's say tomorrow a country was under attack and needed to be evacuated because of our equities needed to be evacuated from there. But you weren't able to see below the cloud surface because there was cloud cover. And so if you were a person that needed to see below clouds, but then you did not have the understanding and to know that an EO image is just going to see the clouds, then you're going to spend a lot of money on EO images. But if you have an understanding of other means to get below the clouds, then you might use a SAR image to see what the 2 points and the choke points between those 2 points look like. And so you might be able to provide that. And then you have to be able to understand other pieces, and it goes just down through each of those domains. Once you get to understanding choke points and calling those out, you have to then be able to be very flexible in your thought and outside the box thinking in order to achieve what you're trying to do. As an example, if there was a building that you didn't know what it was, but you could figure out how to retrieve data that allows you to see, again, in either ad tech or be able to scrape images from past, of screenshots and people taking pictures of and being able to scrape the open internet or be able to pull different information. It's about understanding how to replicate those layers and then pull them together. But the information is out there. I would say less subsurface than anything, and that's all about really because there's less sensors and the ability, but they are out there, just not as robust as others.
It sounds like to me, you're almost describing, and I guess maybe it's the same as open source intelligence, but you're almost describing a new discipline where you have to understand what commercial data is out there, right? Because I could totally see a scenario where the best data, the most important data that you need to solve the problem is some random thing nobody would ever think of. It sounds like you need to have incredible resourcefulness to think, like you said, think outside the box. And if you're trying to, let's say, see below the clouds to understand, how to get from route A to route B, or from point A to point B via an efficient route, let's say, you want to make sure there's no obstacles in the way, etc. Well, maybe the best way to figure that out is, to call a local shop there and say, hey, can I drive down the road today to, I want to come see you. I want to come buy some stuff. Can I drive down the street in front of your building? I hear there's some disruptions happening. The guys, oh, it's totally fine. We're good. That's like a resourceful way that you could kind of layer in. I guess you could call that commercial data. That just sounds like, I don't know what you call that, but human intelligence, I guess you would call it. But very, very similarly, you could purchase some type of commercial data, or you could say tap into closed circuit television cameras, let's say, along that route, or I don't know how ad tech data works precisely, but if you have live ad tech data, you could totally see the flow of traffic based on where the ad tech data is lined up. Am I barking up the right tree?
And in walks the awkward cousin to policy binding us, and that is the ability to acquire on industry side at the speed of need, and the government being bound by an acquisition that takes years. And so the speed at which you'd be able to get to that urban planning company that you're talking about is what industry can do that the government doesn't necessarily have the ability to do at echelon. So they can't do it at every level. And so a partnership in that allows for, in this case, could be just a humanitarian assistance, disaster relief type of a scenario, or it could be some operation that they're looking at. But ultimately, the ability to be able to turn on, turn off, and get to something outside the box at speed is the difference between what we're talking about. But yes, absolutely, leveraging any one of those domains to answer the question. One may take a front seat while the other takes a back seat. Next mission is a different story. And understanding that will make you go broke in the industry. And I would say we might have unlocked a new game show. If you had $1 million and you have a question to answer and go. I mean, if you and I both had that same test right now, we either both will get to the answer and somebody might go broke. And that's really what it comes down to, is that data is expensive. You have to be resourceful, but you also have to make sure that you manage how your resources are being utilized. And that's not just with the data, but you have to talk about there's also considerations in architecture and how that data moves, how it's stored, and that's the reason why you don't buy it's not about owning the haystack, it's about buying the needles. And then the labor part of it, what it takes for people in the industry and commercially to pull that information together. If you make the mistake of hiring the wrong people, it's any one of those things that's the wrong recipe that has the wrong end result. So
I think this is super interesting for a few reasons. The first reason that comes to mind is that what you're talking about in open source intelligence to some extent is really the the gateway between the intelligence community, right, global mission operations, and the commercial world, commercial use cases. More and more data and more sensors coming online. You're seeing more and more commercial companies using data to derive business intelligence and make informed decisions. So I think what you're talking about is a critical piece in that layer from the highly funded, highly successful U.S. intelligence apparatus to, hey, how does Target know where it wants to put its next store, and who knows where that's going, right? Like how much can businesses benefit?
ROI.
You mentioned Costco. What are some other company, or you don't have to say companies specifically, but some industries that could benefit from using commercial analytics to make decisions?
Yeah, interesting. I was attending a conference one time, and I always try to put myself in the end user's position. And so this is an interesting question. And I had a couple of teachers. They came up to me, and I didn't know they were teachers. They came up to a booth in an industry event that was primarily DoD, and I was standing there and just struck up a conversation. And they asked the same question, and I said, "Well, tell me what you do." And they said, "We're teachers." I'm like, "Wow, okay." As I think through the conversation really quickly in my head, I'm like, "Okay, well, you think about school shootings, right? You think about how a data package could circumvent the next school shooting or mass shootings in general, all right? And so if you take that at a broad scale, and you say that you're trying to you're trying to mitigate school shootings, and you say, okay, how do I put a data package over a school, whether that's paid for, and let's just forget about where it's paid for, because that's where it gets sticky. Education not being funded as well, and let's just say that the money's there. Then you could put a suite of sensors, so let's say some license plate readers that are at the entrance and exit of the school, and you might put some cameras around the school, and that doesn't seem in itself too.
A lot of schools are actually starting to do that right now. I actually have a friend down in Tampa, and I was speaking to her recently on some business stuff, and she said they were at the pickup line. Actually, what they're doing is they're scanning license plates so that they know who just pulled in the parking lot, so they can have your child come out of the classroom. So it seems to me like something like that, with the low cost of cameras now, it seems like that's totally going to be data that's available. Sorry, go on. So how do we prevent the school shooting?
Yeah, so it's exactly that. It's about getting the data at the right time, and I would say that you got to get left of the crisis, right? So understanding and building the baseline in that case, taking the shot that is the license plate, whether it's from a reader before they come in or from the teacher, and then pulling that into a database, taking not only that, but opening up the schools, like and this is where it gets a little bit, again, from the government's perspective, may not be from a commercial and a school's perspective. Let's call it a private school that everyone has waivers and they're after trying to make sure they secure the school.
Sure.
It's about monitoring social media. It's about monitoring what is going on when the kid is saying that they're being bullied, when the kid is saying that they can't take X, Y, Z, and being able to not circle in on that right away, because it's all about understanding where the layered information comes in and to find the anomaly that happens. And so it's taking the information, building a baseline, and understanding what that pattern of life, as we call it, looks like. And then after understanding what the baseline looks like, it's about calling out the anomalies that, hey, there's a person that has flagged in a weird way, or has, came out and is against a certain thing or item or adversely being affected. And then saying, oh, okay, well now there's a person pulling into the parking lot that is not typical. And those two things on themselves are not actually a problem. But then whenever they start coalescing, like, that is correlate, the vehicle is correlated to someone, that the same person, parents, vehicle, whatever the case may be. And then those cameras having a software behind them that highlights through computer vision that there's a long rifle or something that is being pulled out that allows the school to lock the door in the front. And it's just an example of how that could have been how that could be mitigated. If not, those kind of things, just information being layered. That's one example in a school where data can be purchased that saves a life. And it's about, again, taking the resources that is there and being able to understand through the right recipe what resources would make the right sense, and then running that. It's not going to be, you don't try to run that scenario at time of crisis. You run just like anything that is successful. You have to run your practice rounds, and you have to prior to the time of need. And so if you looked at that, I think it goes much further in scale. If you took and considered, if you considered the security environment, like the home security. Everyone has, or a lot. I won't say everyone. A lot of people have security systems. In my house, it makes me feel better because I can't hear, so I turn on my alarm that I can hear if a door opens in the middle of the night. Mostly my children, especially as they get older, trying to sneak out, whatnot. But also if a door opens, a glass breaks on the window, whatever the case. But imagine a data package that, again, I want to protect my own information more than most. And so there's a solution for that. Instead of having the information shared out of your house, if you were to have a tool that was in your house that collected your information, in a geofence or watch box around your house, that then, again, creates the pattern, that then if there's a different thing that pops up in the pattern, whether you're home or not home, then it's about layering that, where they come from, and then being able to productize the security monitoring of that. And again, it's something that it's use cases are unlimited. It's about understanding what the intent is and being able to apply the sources and methods.
In the home use case that you just mentioned, you mentioned some type of platform that is, housing that data. Is that something that you're providing right now? Is a platform that can go inside people's home and aggregate data and point out anomalies?
Not today. That was really visionary, right?
Okay.
And so, but right. I would imagine if I was to be okay with that, that's where I would want. I would want
right.
something that was an on-premise solution, and not to say that cloud is not, but the greater audience probably would likely be more comfortable with it being inside of their hands, their data.
Right.
But there are cloud solutions that are, really secure, probably more in some ways more secure with better applications that are kind of wrapping the data and maintaining it. So it could be there's a solution in both of those, but it's really about the confidence level of how the information is stored. So then it can't the breaches are more limited is what I would be worried about in my data, in my family's data, in that kind of stuff. And so it's not something. It was more visionary.
I gotcha.
This example, yeah.
I gotcha. Well, cool. How can people reach out to you if they're interested in commercial data analytics?
So on smxtech.com, you can go through the webpage there into Elevate ISR, and there's not only an examples of what we just a lot of the things we just talked about, things like how we receive our data and where we pull it into. That's called our toolkit, and our analysts have access to that, and they've been using it. But we're moving eventually into a position where that's going to be a self-service option, where we want to take this exquisite data and tool recipe and allow our customers potentially to use it. We're not there yet, but there's a couple of white papers and slick sheets on the website there.
Okay, so if I Google SMX Tech Elevate ISR, that will probably...
Absolutely. You go to YouTube, there's a video of a lot of what we just talked about.
Okay.
If you Google, or if you went to YouTube and looked up, search Elevate ISR.
I think it would be really interesting, maybe in the near future, if we could do some type of video demo of what you're talking about, and I just throw it up on my YouTube just to show people what it's all about, because I think it's really powerful, and listening to it, and I understand it perfectly. Mostly, I'll say I understand it mostly, but I think it'd be really powerful to actually demonstrate the capability, just on like a video. So would you be open to do that?
Yeah, absolutely. We have some vignettes. I would say that if we don't gather, if we're not willing to open up in that environment, we're going to be paced. And so it's paramount that not only for Americans to understand that there is a pacing threat, that there are pacing threats. And most kind of don't get bound up by that, don't understand it, and necessarily don't pay attention to it if it's not directly affecting them. But being able to understand the fact that if we don't accept that, then there's a bigger threat than your information being, and you're being collected on all the time, just in commercial spaces. So I would say I'm open at any time we can show the power of what we've already experienced with commercial analytics and open up the use case, as you said, whether that's helping provide security over a school and mitigating a shooting incident, or whether that is providing a farmer information. I mean, getting the information out there and being able to push into those use cases is paramount, and that's one way I'm open to it. Yeah.
Cool. Awesome. Well, let's do it.
Awesome.
Next time. Steve, appreciate you, man.
Absolutely, Nick. I really appreciate the time coming over here. I'll tell you, looking at the podcast and following it and knowing you, I'll just commend you for just the amount of people, the circle that you have behind this podcast. I'm really just, I'm super humbled to be a part of it, and I really appreciate it, and I'll treasure it forever. But I would say that it's interesting that, as I'm able to have the conversation at this level, I would say that in order to take it really deep into policy and and how we're not able to get to the next level in commercial analytics, and how the operations, by the way, and what that looks like, I would say that if you're open to it, I have a team of people that I would like to see if there's an opportunity to take this podcast in addition to the vignette that you talked about. We'll get that on, but I'd like to see if the director for Elevate ISR or a team that can come on and have this conversation deeper with you, depending on how your audience responds.
Well, audience or not, I'd be interested in that, so that's good enough for me, and I appreciate it. The podcast's a lot of fun. I have to do more episodes.
Yeah.
I know it's tough working all the time, and I just moved to beautiful Starkville, Mississippi, the center of the universe.
Wow.
But it's been a lot of fun doing it, so we'll keep going with it, see how it is. I enjoy it, and that's part of the reason why I do it. It's kind of a selfish reason, I suppose, but it's been a lot of fun. But
Yeah.
Steve, appreciate you being here, man.
Absolutely. Thank you.
All right, later.
All right.